What happens when one man tries to watch all of the horror films and sci-fi films of the 1950s? Well, we're about to find out because I'm your host, Josh Spiegel, and this is the 50s Project. Alright, here we go. We are diving into 1956 already. Can't believe that we're in the back half of the year already on the 50s Project. Now, things are in full swing. We've got giant monsters, we've got alien invasions galore, all kinds of aliens everywhere, really. But yeah, there's a lot, and it's actually getting a lot thicker. So 1956 is going to be split into 3 episodes. It's the first year of this decade to be split into 3. So let's get diving in right now and find out what 56 is all about. This year is going to start off in an international way because we're headed over to Japan for a film that debuted there on January 29th and didn't run here until the 60s, and it's Warning from Space. It starts on a UFO and some Starro-looking aliens, and they have a Kryptonian prison with them. And they went to contact a human named Kumara to warn Earth about the upcoming disaster. Meanwhile, on Earth, there's reports of flying saucers, and a reporter asks Kumara about what he thinks they are, but he's not sure. There's another professor here named Isobe, and he spots an object in the sky releasing a bunch of smaller ones and freaks out. So he reaches out to Kumara, but as they're doing so, a ship appears overhead with a very familiar sound to it.
Dr. Kimura, that looks like the one I sighted.
Later, something touches down in a nearby lake, and up from the water is some kind of monster. Seems that there's more out there too, all showing up in bodies of water, and things start to ramp up when a woman sees one of the starfish-looking things looking at her from her apartment, and a performer sees one backstage. But this is all the starfish guys trying to get in touch with humans, but failing, and I'm sorry, look at these fellows. These are my new favorite aliens. They decide that the only way that they'll get through to the Earthlings is if they take on the form of one of them, so Ginkgo chooses to take on human form and go to Earth. Turns out that she looks identical to a famous singer, and she uses the form to try to communicate with them about trying to save the Earth from destruction. But they figure out that she's an alien in disguise. But will they listen? Or will they just decide to ignore it like we always do and just sort of let the end of the world happen right in front of us? So, this one is from Koji Shima, a rather long-storied director who mostly stuck with Japanese films and first started out as an actor. This film was a direct response to the success of Godzilla, as a number of companies wanted to get on the monster movie action. It was from Daiei Films, the company that would soon make Gamera, and apparently they liked that sound effect since they used it there and here. Because Godzilla was a giant monster, and the parent aliens in this film were human-sized, when it came time to make the poster, they showed them as being massive. It also has the status of being the first full-color Japanese science fiction film, and it was said to be highly influential on others at the time, possibly even Stanley Kubrick when it came time to do 2001. And we're giving this one a 3 out of a possible 5. It's decent, but it's a bit all over the place, and I'd rather see more of those starfish guys, but they get shoved to the wayside for far too much of the time. The cultural significance is a 1.5 since it's not much known over here, but it did get a bit of recognition and the attention of Kubrick, so it gets a slight boost. Should you watch it? I'd say yeah, it has a lot of star power, because of the star people, get it? We're staying in international territory now because one day later, on January 30th, we had the UK premiere of a film that would release in the US sometime in December, and it's The Gamma People. There's this train with these two guys going on a cross-country trip, but for some reason, it breaks loose from the main car and goes cruising into a small area called Gudavia. They're surprised by the train's appearance and go out to meet them, but seem very wary. Turns out that that's because there's a mad scientist in the town conducting some sort of experiment, and he seems keen on them not discovering what he's doing. They find themselves stranded there, unable to contact anyone, and hole up in a local hotel after noting that the children there act peculiar. There, a woman passes Howard a note and says they need help, and that someone named Boronsky, that mad doctor, must be destroyed. Meanwhile, if Howard looks familiar, or sounds familiar, it's because he's the voice of the Sorting Hat in the Harry Potter films. They encounter some zombie-like individuals in the town and finally meet Boronsky, and he says that he has an interest in the youth, and one of those youths show off his latest work, this weird-ass mask. As they're trapped, they decide to look into what's going on, discovering the doc is using gamma rays for his experiments, and it affects the kids, turning some of them into little jerks, but smart jerks, and others into brainless monsters. And this is kind of a weird one. It was a joint production between the UK and US, and was directed and co-written by John Gilling. We saw him a few years ago with a very different type of film with Mother Riley Meets the Vampire, but later on he'd go on to do work with Hammer. This was put out in the US by Columbia and was sort of based on some of the weird experimentations that the Germans did during World War II. And even though they make Boronsky more of a generic mad scientist, it's clear what the inspirations were, and with the young kids as a sort of a Hitler youth. One of the stranger side stories here is that the film was co-written by Lewis Pollock. This was around the time of the Big Red Scare and the McCarthy witch hunts and the Un-American Activities Committee. Well, then Lewis Pollock refused to give testimony and got in trouble. But the problem is, that was Lewis Pollock with an A, and the writer was Lewis Pollock with an O. And he was never even called on to testify, but because of a clerical error, he was blacklisted and couldn't work in the industry for 5 years. And this is alright, I'll go 2.5 on it, because the ideas are cool and there's fun stuff, but it sort of takes a weird direction to get to it, and it doesn't quite gel. The CS is just a 1.5 as well, since it's a lesser known film, but it got a bit of attention, even if it was mainly just an awareness of the title. Should you watch it? Maybe. It's not a bad film, and there's some cool things happening, but I just don't know if it clicked for me. Well, it's time to kick into a big one here, and on February 5th, we're in the US for the first time on this block with Invasion of the Body Snatchers. We begin in a hotel as a doctor is called in to look at a raving lunatic brought in by the police, and it's RJ Fletcher, and he tells the authorities his story. He returns home from a convention, as he's a doctor himself, and he meets up with an old flame, Becky, returning after getting a divorce. Seems there's a spate of people who are claiming that their loved ones aren't the people that they once were. They look, talk, and act just like they should, but there's no emotion in them, and they claim that the people are imposters. Seems like it started a few weeks ago and has started to affect things in the town, so the local bar is empty of customers. Miles gets called away and he goes to the house of a friend of his, another doctor, and discovers that he has a body on his pool table. Even weirder, the body doesn't have any outstanding physical features and no fingerprints. When Jack cuts his hand, they discover that the wound appears on a duplicate as well. It takes a turn when Miles finds one of these bodies in Becky's basement, seemingly put there by her father, but when Jack's double vanishes, the authorities won't believe them. Then, they all discover this big thing that looks like a seed pod, and one of the blank bodies comes out of it, and they theorize that the forms stay unfocused until a person goes to sleep, and that's when the duplication happens. I should also mention that Teddy is played by Carolyn Jones, And it's kind of hard to see it here based on this look that they give her, but this is Morticia Addams. Before long, they realize that the majority of the people around them have already been replaced, and they're in the minority, leading to Miles and Becky going on the run, trying to stay awake and stay human. And where do I begin here? This is by Don Siegel. It's the first we're seeing him on the project, and it may be the last time because he'll a little bit later on deal with action films and did Dirty Harry, The Shootist, Escape from Alcatraz, and a bunch of other cool flicks. This one was based on a novel, a 1954 work by Jack Finney called The Body Snatchers, and had a budget of around $400K. When the film was complete, they wanted to call it The Body Snatchers, like the novel, but there was already a film from '45 called The Body Snatcher, so they had to make an adjustment, and changed it to They Come From Another World. It was stuck with that for a while, but swapped some titles out along the way before landing on Invasion of the Body Snatchers. And here's the big thing. Originally, the ending of this film was Miles on the road, screaming, "You're next, you're next." And you know, that road? Right behind him, over this hill, is Universal Studios. But it was a downer ending, and the studio objected and had them add the prologue and ending in which the authorities are tipped off to the aliens' presence, giving a more hopeful resolution, even though Siegel hated it and said that it nearly ruined the film. It was a huge hit in the theater though, and earned around $3 million, making it a big money maker. The wildest thing about this film is the subtext. This is a very blatant and upfront political commentary, although what that message is can be open to interpretation. Some saw it as a condemnation of McCarthyism and a warning about the rise of mass conformity in the post-war era. But then again, others viewed it as an allegory for the dangers of communism. So either way, it seemed to be a window into the fears and concerns of every side of America at the time. Siegel himself admitted that the film was obvious in its commentary and seemed to lean more towards that McCarthy reading, although he says that he was more interested in discussing people's lack of autonomy and individualism. Later, of course, there would be remakes, or sequels? Hard to say exactly, but in 1978 there was a very good version, simply called Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and in '93 there was simply Body Snatchers. Finally, in 2007, there was a big budget calamity called The Invasion that was a very troubled shoot and different take on the original. Beyond that, there were lots of similar themed films and shows, and the idea of a pod person became a part of the common parlance. And I'm giving this a 4.5. It's one of the greats. It doesn't feel like anything else from this era, and there's just levels of it and layers that you're not getting from most other 50s flicks. There's this sense of dread and tension just dripping all throughout, and it rocks. The only reason it doesn't get a 5 is because of that tacked on ending. The CS is the same, since it is a household name, and the idea of pod people is something that everyone is aware of. Also, its influence on the film world was strong, creating a bunch of imitators and clones, and creating a ton of discussion about its reasons. The only reason it's not a 5 is it never reached that mass market kids carrying lunchbox level of fame. Should you watch it? Yep, do it and then take a nice nap.
They're here already! You're next! You're next! You're next! You're next! You're next!
This next one debuted on March 6th in the UK and would get an American release in September of the '56, and it's 1984, which is interesting since I just covered a version of this on the '84 episodes of the '80s Project. It shows us a nuclear war that happens in the '60s and the nations that form in its wake, and London is part of one of them called Oceania. They're watched over by giant screens and posters everywhere that let you know that Big Brother is watching you. The nation of Eurasia is at war with them and tries bombing them, and then we meet Winston Smith, played by Edmund O'Brien, who hasn't appeared on the project since 1939's Hunchback of Notre Dame. Smith keeps a diary, although he says that that act is illegal and punishable by death, and he goes out with his neighbor, little baby Dr. Loomis, for a drink where they discuss how much they love the government. Smith sees a woman he knows, Julia, and he seems to have some connection to her and follows her out. He gets stopped and questioned by the police and has to report in the following morning and deal with questioning, and his job is altering elements of the past to fit better with Big Brother's current agenda. He finds evidence that two men who were branded as traitors would be innocent and is forced to destroy it before going to a rally where Big Brother's image appears and gets them to chant messages of hate. Smith and Julie make plans to meet out in a remote area with no cameras or microphones, and they begin to have an affair, although love, like most other things, is outlawed. They start seeing each other, evading capture while also serving as members of the underground, working to break free of Big Brother's rule. But who can they trust, if anyone? Of course, this is based on the George Orwell novel of the same name. That was from 1949, so this movie came out not very long after it was released. It wasn't the first adaptation of it though, since there were some TV versions a few years earlier, but this was the first feature film. It was directed by Michael Anderson, and this was pretty early in his career and is the first we're seeing him, but he'd go on to do Around the World in 80 Days, and much later on, Logan's Run and Orca. What's weird is that this film was partially funded by the CIA. They had a front company called the American Committee for Cultural Freedom, and they bought the rights to both this film and Animal Farm, making that film first and this one next. There's also actually two different endings to this. In the UK, the film featured a finale that altered that of the book, and it's still downbeat, but more defiant, and Orwell's widow was very unhappy with it. The US version had an ending that more closely resembled that in the original novel. There's not a lot of information about how well it did, but it looks like the reviews were merely mediocre, stating that the earlier TV versions were superior. Of course, there would be additional adaptations later on, including that '84 version that I've already covered, and of course, reality. And this version's good, but it's not great. It's a 3. It's just too dry. It doesn't seem to be that interested in delving too deep into the themes. The performances are all strong though, and there's no denying that the story is always relevant and haunting. The significance is a 3.5 since it's the film version of one of the most known works of literature of all time, but it's not the best version nor the most known or impactful. Should you watch it? Yeah, probably. There's no shortage of big releases here because on March 23rd, a film went into limited release before getting a wider drop in June, and it's Forbidden Planet. It's set in the future, 2200 AD, and we've spread out into the universe, colonized deep space. We have this ship called C-57D, and they're on a trip to this planet called Altair 4. And they say that 20 years ago, a ship called the Bellerophon crash landed there, and their mission is to search for survivors. And look at this guy, the captain. Whatever you do, don't call him Shirley. They get a radio signal, and it's from someone claiming to be from the Bellerophon, and he tries to tell them that they don't need help and urges them to come back. They come in for a landing anyway, and shortly after are met by a vehicle driven by a robot. But not just any robot, Robbie the robot. But we'll talk more about him later.
Is it male or female?
It's a robot. I know that it's not outright stated, but that certainly implies that this guy's first thought was, can I have sex with this thing? And then it's Morbin time because they're taking to meet Dr. Morbius, played by Wilson Pickett. He tells them that all of the others on the ship died, killed by some unseen force, and that only him and his wife were able to survive, even though there's no record of a wife on the ship's rosters. But then, he says she died later of natural causes. It's like a girl, you don't know her, she lives in Canada. But then his daughter emerges.
I wouldn't mind being Robbie in certain ways. That's only in certain ways, of course.
I can see that was probably very clever, but I don't seem to understand it.
I don't either. Is he thinking that the robot has sex with her and he wants to do that? Why is this guy so obsessed with sex with robots? Or is that just me here? Well, he then convinces Altera to kiss him, basically by lying to her. And I should note that the captain basically tells her that his men have been in space for a long time, as she's walking around wearing a dress that exposes her naked legs and calves. And we would have served her right if they'd have taken advantage of her. And yeah, sure, dude, totally her fault, not the personal responsibility of those guys at all to, not assault someone. Soon, though, Morbius tells about the Krell, an alien race that used to exist there, but all of them died off 200,000 years earlier, overnight. Most of the tech there have been left over from them, and when Adams insists that he share it with humanity, the doc says no. But then, when they want to head back home and a giant monster appears to kill several of them, they have to figure out what's happening on this planet and figure out why it's so damn forbidden. Like the Forbidden Dance. Is it just too sexy? So this was a big budget number from MGM and had a price tag of around $2 million. And a good chunk of that went into the creation of Robbie the Robot. The director was Fred Wilcox, and he actually had a very short filmography, and several of those were Lassie films in the 40s. This was his second to last film as he passed away in 1964. It was very warmly received, with mostly strong reviews, and it did well at the box office, even if its high costs limited its profitability, but it tallied almost $3 million. Not bad for a film that some have said was a weird adaptation of The Tempest. But it had a lot of firsts for the genre. It was the first depiction of a light-speed drive on a human ship, and the first film to take place on a planet outside of our solar system. Plus, Robbie was a big change from the standard bot characters, since he had a personality and his own character. He was so popular that he started showing up in various other films, some of which we'll cover later, but also a ton of TV shows. And get this, Robbie is often confused for Robot from Lost in Space, although they look quite different. But Robbie did in fact appear in several episodes of that show. There's been several attempts to get a remake going, with a number of different directors and writers being involved, and even in 2024, it was said that a version was being worked on. And this is a cool one. It's a 4. It's a good mix of pleasant story and awesome setting with great effects, all working together to make a satisfying whole. The significance is a 3.5, and I want to give this one more, but I give it most of the points for the influence it had on the film world and industry. But in terms of longevity and impact on the cultural landscape, this just didn't stick as well as the others in the same realm did, and I feel like it's not one that's been seen on a wider level. Should you watch it? Yep, it's not forbidden to do so.
$480 pikes.
A mere 2 days later, we had a much smaller film in terms of notoriety and budget as we go to March 25th and check out World Without End. There's this ship called XRN that had a space mission and they've lost communication with it, and we meet that group, and they're meant to fly around Mars. However, their ship instead speeds up and then crash lands on some other planet, one with a snowy mountain and breathable atmosphere. They get out and go exploring, finding a cave, and inside there's an extremely convincing giant spider. Like, I can't believe how real this looks. Shortly after, though, they're also attacked by a group of Neanderthal-like men with visibly mutated faces. But then things get weird when they discover a gravestone, and it looks like one on Earth, and is dated post-2068. They theorized that they went so fast there was a time dilation and centuries have passed, and they estimate that it's least in the 2300s.
Wonder why a fellow like that isn't married.
Yep, that's certainly the thing I wonder when I'm in the far future and trying to figure out how to survive. Eventually, they have to take refuge in another cave and find a steel door which leads to a futuristic-looking passageway. And when they enter, they encounter a group of men who tell them the world was destroyed in a nuclear war. They want them to surrender their weapons, and then Garnet shows up, the mandatory hot lady that will fall in love with one of the astronauts. There's other women there, and they make a note that they're all young and beautiful, and the men are all older and withered. The astronauts want to combine their skills to reclaim the surface and eliminate the mutates, but one of the councils, Maurice, is opposed to them and plans to steal their guns and betray them. So our group has to try to navigate convincing the council and dealing with jealousy in order to survive this future world, and maybe try to find a way back to the past. Meanwhile, I love that his method of killing is basically a light bop on the head. Alright, so this was part of a double feature with the next film that we're going to discuss, and it was from Allied Artists, the company that was formed from the ashes of Monogram, the Poverty Row company that we've discussed a whole lot over the 30s and 40s. It was written and directed by Edward Burns, and we saw him back in '54 with the Bowery Boys Meet the Monsters. This was their attempt to break out of lower budgeted films and be seen as a bigger studio, and they put more money and effort into it, which is why it's in CinemaScope and in full color. It did pretty well in sales, and that was enough that the H.G. Wells estate got involved, since the plot was really close to The Time Machine, with the Morlocks and the Eloi filling in for the Underground Men and the Mutates. They threatened a lawsuit, but then just never followed through with it. And that's interesting because this film is an early role for Rod Taylor, an Australian actor who had gone to a bunch of bigger things, including The Birds, and yep, the 1960s version of The Time Machine. And this one's at 2.5. There's just way too much time hanging out in the underground city talking. The beginning is so promising and interesting, but then they just settle in for most of the runtime, and it doesn't kick in again until the final 10 minutes. The CS is just a 1.5 since it doesn't really get talked about that much and didn't impact the genre, but had a bit of attention to get that extra 0.5. Should you watch it? Maybe. It's not terrible and the beginning and finale are worth it, but just know that the middle is a bit sluggish. On that very same day, March 25th, we're going to take a look at the other half of that double feature, and it's The Indestructible Man. It begins with a prisoner on death row named Butcher Benson, and it's Lon Chaney Jr., who we haven't seen since 51's Bride of the Gorilla, but he'd been keeping busy in a bunch of westerns and crime stories in the meantime. He says he's been double-crossed and plans to get revenge on the 3 men who turned evidence against him, and there's a cop on the job who's trying to locate some missing money from his case. He questions Eva, his old girlfriend, who claims to not know anything, although the butcher had given her a map to where the loot is stashed. Benton is executed via the gas chamber, but a scientist gets his hands on the body and wants to use it for an experiment that he says will cure cancer by rejuvenating dead tissue. And hey, Doc, maybe don't try the revivification experiment on the condemned murderer? Well, it works, and the butcher is resurrected. But a side effect is that he's stronger than before, and that his skin is unbreakable. Unsurprisingly, he kills the doc and his assistant, and then goes on a rampage, just lifting up cars and shrugging off bullets. He goes to try to get his money back and also kills those squealers, and I should mention that the whole thing has this noir-style voiceover on top of it, and it's one of those where the voice is basically just repeating what's happening on screen, in case you're really dumb and just can't comprehend the images that you're seeing, I guess. Like, he gets shot several times, but the bullets don't do anything, and the voiceover says it's because he's bulletproof now. Like, duh. He does a cool little tour of downtown LA while doing so, and they go on Angel's Flight, which is still there today, and into the infamous Bradbury building where Blade Runner, Chinatown, 500 Days of Summer, and like 500 other films were shot. So then it's up to the police to end his reign of terror. But how do you stop an indestructible man? As I mentioned, this was the other film on that double feature with World Without End, and was also by Allied artists, reflecting more of their standard look and budget. The director was Jack Pollocksfin, and was one of only 3 movies that he did, and one was uncredited. He had a much bigger roster as a writer, though, and several of his scripts were featured on the project, like The Neanderthal Man, Captive Women, Son of Dr. Jekyll, and The Man from Planet X. One thing to note is that Chaney only has spoken dialogue in the beginning of this film, and this is possibly due to his drinking issues, as he asked the director to limit shooting after noon, when he would likely be drunk. It did well enough and earned a bit of notoriety, and if you're a fan of the Mountain Goats like me, you'll be surprised to know that the song Rotten Stinking Mouthpiece is directly inspired by this film. And I'm just giving this one a 2. It's really sluggish and takes way too long for anything to happen. There's some cool moments like that Bradbury Building bit, but for the most part, it's all things we've seen before, and done better. The significance is just a 1.5 since it's not known, was quickly forgotten, and only has the presence of Chaney to boost it. Should you watch it? You can probably skip it. It's like 40% just close-up of Lon's face anyway. This next one takes us all the way over to Malaysia, and there's some disputed dates here, but it seems like most people point to April 20th, 56 as the release date for Curse of the Oily Man, or Orang Minyak. We're in this tiny village and everyone is looking for a guy named Bong Kok, and he's got some facial deformities and a hunched back and takes refuge at Selamat's house. The villagers burned down his shack, so he plans to leave town, but he's convinced to stay. It turns out that he's a great artist, which shocks Selamat because, he not pretty, so how can he art? He starts selling his pieces in the local market, and they're extremely popular, but eventually those thugs catch up to Bangkok, and they beat him and stone him. He's saved by some others, but that night he's ganged up on again, and they decide that he must leave the village. As he leaves, though, he's caught in a torrential downpour, and that leads to a sort of fantasy sequence. And this magical boat that carries him to a land where he's welcomed and meets up with the king and is given one wish. He uses it to have a more standard look and immediately starts to serenade the princess, and I should point out that this whole sequence goes on for a really long time. But then they tell him that he has to leave, but they only have one condition, and that's that he must never kill another human being. Looks like that's hard or something. But he wants to take the princess with him since they're in love, but is forbidden. He returns home and causes a commotion, but after some tragic events, he finds that condition a little harder to keep than he thought. Now, he'll learn exactly what the curse of the Oily Man is all about. And this is by a Malaysian director named P. Ramlee, and he also plays Bangkok in it, and the Oily Man was an urban legend in the area at the time. It was said to be a creature covered in black grease who would abduct young women at night. This was the first time that the character had been featured in a film, although the Oily Man would show up in a whole bunch of different adventures, usually with different interpretations throughout the decades. There's not much in the way of information about this one, or the making of it, or even how well it did, but it did launch a new genre of films. And I'm giving this a 3. It's such a weird movie that it's pretty fun to watch. There's just such a bizarre feel to it, and it's not much like anything else that we're seeing here, so it feels fresh and wild. The CS is just a 1 though, since it's not known over here, and that legend isn't something that translates well, so it's mostly a small curiosity. Should you watch it? I'd say yeah. You likely haven't seen much else like it.
Benar, si Buyonglah pembunuh bapakku. Sebab dia menolak pinanganku. Pinanganmu tak sah. Sebab apa tak sah? Sebab aku tak suka padamu.
We'll end this block on April 26th as we head back to the US and dip back into the world of the Universal Monsters, for the last time actually, with the creature Walks Among Us. So, At the ending of the last film, the creature was once again shot up and seemingly dead at sea, and a group of scientists meet up under the leadership of a man named Dr. Barton. And that's Jeff Morrow, who we just saw with a big fake forehead in This Island Earth. Speaking of that film, the deep, deep voice of Rex Reason is in this too, and they believe that the creature is still alive and plan to go capture him. They think that they see something on the sonar.
Giant rock lobster.
Rock lobster! They encounter a man who claims to have been attacked by it, and they go to that general area and start to dive, and weirdly, can talk to the boat while they're underwater, even though none of them appear to be wearing any apparatus that would allow that. Morgan flirts a bit with Barton's wife, Marcia, and they locate the creature, but realize that it's also stalking them. They have to face off with it and set it on fire to get it away, but it still keeps coming until it passes out, and they're able to take it in. But then, they realize that the burns are too extensive and have damaged the gills too greatly, so they have to do a surgery that transforms its lungs into an air-breathing configuration. They notice that he is changing and his eyes are different, and it's taken on a more human look. They even put the dude in clothes. Problem is that he's no longer able to survive in the water and is in danger of drowning. So now they have to try to get it to adjust to a life less aquatic, even if its rage issues might make that a touch difficult. So this one is sort of a big deal because it's the final film of the Creature saga and the last of the Universal Monster entries. It's the first of the franchise to not be shot in 3D and was directed by John Sherwood, who had a big career as an assistant director but only did 3 features, with his final effort released in '57, which we'll talk about when we get there. Like the last film, they opted to have 2 different people play the creature. Riku Browning returned to handle the depiction of the dude in the water, but for all the bits on land, they cast Don Megawan, who was a much larger man and a full 6 inches taller than Browning. The budget isn't listed for this entry, but it wasn't as warmly received as the previous 2, although it seems to have done well enough, earning $1 million at the box office. And this would be the finale for the classic versions of the Universal Monsters, as the studio fully moved away from it as their branding, although they would shift control over to Hammer Studios, who would create their own version of the characters later on. Oddly, there have been no more films to feature the Gill-Man in sequel or remake form, although there have been attempts to bring him back over the years. There have been unofficial returns, though, in films like The Monster Squad and Del Toro's The Shape of Water, but for now, the creature continues to not walk among us. And this one's a drag, actually. I'm just giving it a 2. There's some cool bits at the beginning, but they're just replays of what we've seen before. But then, when it shifts to the mutated form on land, it just feels like a standard monster flick and not much happens. The CS is a 3 since it is lesser seen and not as popular as the others in the series, but it is a part of the saga, and the final part to boot. Should you watch it? Probably yes, for completion of the Universal Monster stories, but it's not much fun. So there you have it. 1956 is started off in a pretty big way. There's a lot of really solid movies in here. And my absolute favorite one of this block is clearly Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Great movie. Really great. Not quite top level, but almost there. Really good one. Let me know what your favorite one is down below, though. I want to hear which of these is your favorite. Which of these have you seen? Which of these would you now like to see? Tell me that down below. If you liked the video, hit that thumbs up to let me know. If you enjoy the channel, subscribe to it and hit the bell to get notified when videos get released. And also check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/movietimelines and help support this channel. And maybe go buy one of my books at movietimelines.org. Thanks a lot. We'll see you very shortly as we continue on with 1956 right here on the 50s Project.